Westminster Speaker in Bristol yesterday were utterly shameful. We saw criminal thuggery and disorder caused by a minority who put lives at risk, and our exceptional and brave police officers put themselves in harm's way to protect the public. Then to face the criminal violence against them while upholding the law is completely unacceptable. My thoughts are with the injured officers and their families.
One hotel, 2 crowds, 8 arrests, 23 injured officers, and more than 1,600 police deployed across 3 British cities in less than 12 hours. Those were the numbers flashing across Avon and Somerset police consoles when dawn broke over Redcliffe this morning. But numbers alone cannot capture the feeling on the ground. The sense that a country already fraying at the edges has finally stepped into a conflict it can no longer pretend is temporary. Bristol was supposed to be calm. It was supposed to be resilient. It was supposed to be ready. Instead, at 7:12 a.m, the city awoke to smoke, barricades, and a question Westminster still refuses to answer. How do you govern a nation that no longer agrees on who belongs within its borders? The Redcliffe Hotel, once a bland corporate building tucked between the harbour and a stretch of commuter flats, has become the newest fault line in Britain's widening migrant crisis. For months, it has housed asylum seekers under emergency accommodation orders, but last night, the pavement in front of it did not look like emergency housing. It looked like a battleground. On one side stood the Bristol Patriots, wrapped in union flags and clutching megaphones. On the other were hundreds from Stand Up to Racism, chanting in defence of the asylum seekers they say have been turned into political props long before they were turned into targets. 2 visions of Britain, one angry, one defiant, collided on a street that was never built to hold the weight of a national argument. Police had predicted a crowd of 300. Instead, more than 1,200 appeared by 8 p.m, surging into the narrow road outside the hotel. Flares crackled. Chants turned to shouts. Barricades buckled under fists and banners. Officers raised shields as bottles arced overhead, smashing against visors and vans. A sergeant was carried away, bleeding from the jaw. A superintendent described the scene as minutes from spiralling, a phrase repeated by every officer pulled into the fray. Avon and Somerset police requested reinforcements twice. They established a dispersal zone stretching across Redcliffe Way, giving officers emergency powers to remove anyone likely to cause disorder. But disorder had already arrived. By 9:30 p.m, the 2 crowds were no longer merely shouting at each other. They were moving, pushing, colliding, 2 tides fighting for the same ground. And in moments like that, Britain felt small, not in geography, but in confidence. By midnight, 8 individuals were in custody. 2 patrol vehicles had shattered windshields. Riot police stood shoulder to shoulder across Redcliffe Bridge as projectiles continued to rain in from the edges of the crowd. Police medics treated officers for burns, cuts, and concussion. No civilian fatalities were reported, but several protesters were hospitalised. The hotel itself was rushed into lockdown. Windows were boarded. Security sealed the entrances. Asylum seekers inside were told to stay away from windows, lie on the floor if they heard loud bangs, and prepare for evacuation if the perimeter collapsed. This was not the scene of a policy disagreement. It was the anatomy of a rupture. By early morning, Bristol's streets held the metallic smell of extinguished flares, spilled beer, and adrenaline that never had the chance to burn out. Officers remained in place as daylight crawled across the Redcliffe skyline. Commuters paused, staring at the debris scattered across the pavement. Broken placards, torn fabric, police tape fluttering like warning flags. A shop owner sweeping glass from his doorway muttered, "This is not protest anymore. This is proof something snapped." And he is right. Britain has seen 3 major migrant-related flashpoints in the last 6 months: Liverpool, Stoke and Manchester, each escalating faster than the Home Office predicted, each dismissed by ministers as isolated tension. But isolation ends where repetition begins, and Bristol did not erupt because of a single hotel. It erupted because for too long the government has asked towns and cities to absorb decisions made in rooms they will never enter, bearing costs they cannot vote on, defending policies they were never asked to approve. Yet at Westminster, the response remains eerily unchanged. Increased community engagement efforts are underway. Another line written for cameras, not communities. And speaking of cameras, before we go deeper, if you believe independent reporting must continue even when the country feels like it is tearing itself apart, then take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. It keeps Empire Alert News alive when national institutions would prefer silence over scrutiny. Now, back to Bristol. By 10 p.m, police deployed the public order crime team, a move normally reserved for large-scale football disorder or coordinated protests. Body-worn footage captured officers forming phalanx-style lines to push both crowds back. A flare burst inches from an inspector's helmet. Another officer was dragged backward by his vest before colleagues pulled him free. The hotline for reporting extremist activity received triple its usual calls. Several were false alarms, but some weren't. A handful of individuals connected to far-right networks were detained on suspicion of incitement. Their goal was simple: turn Redcliffe into a symbol. And for a moment, they succeeded. At 11:18 p.m, a chant rolled through the crowd. "Send them home," followed seconds later by another. "Refugees are welcome." Two messages, two Britons, and between them, a line of officers standing in a country that has not decided which future it wants. The Home Office released a statement just after midnight. "We are monitoring the situation." Monitoring Britain has been monitoring the migrant crisis for years, watching as hotels fill faster than asylum interviews can be processed, as local councils scramble to meet rising costs, as misinformation spreads online faster than corrections can catch it. Monitoring is not management. Monitoring is the quiet word governments use when they hope a problem will burn out before they must pick up the hose. Meanwhile, residents living near the hotel spent the night hearing sirens echo through the flats. One mother said her children woke 3 times asking if the shouting outside meant someone was coming for them. Another resident filmed sparks from a flare cascading onto parked cars. At 3 a.m, officers still patrolled the street, boots crunching over glass as they searched alleyways for improvised weapons. At 4 a.m, the dispersal zone was extended. At 5 a.m, the final pockets of crowds dispersed. And at 7:12 a.m, Bristol took its first breath of the morning. A breath heavy with questions no one in power seems prepared to answer. But beneath the chaos, something else surfaced. Something quieter, but perhaps more important than the noise of the night before. Around 6:30 a.m, a local cafe opened early to serve exhausted officers and shaken residents. A volunteer left blankets at the hotel entrance for asylum seekers who had spent the night awake and frightened. A man who opposed the hotel's use still helped sweep debris from outside a neighbour's shop. 2 women from opposing sides of the protest found themselves holding the same trash bag, picking up the same shattered glass, and realising that the person next to them was not the caricature they had shouted at hours earlier. Humanity breaks through in strange places, sometimes in the smoking remains of a street that briefly forgot its own heart. And that is where Bristol's story turns. Not away from conflict, but toward reflection, because what happened in Redcliffe is not just about immigration. It is about fear. It is about identity. It is about a nation deciding whether it wants to argue or understand, fracture or rebuild. By 8 a.m, a small group gathered near the police cordon. No banners, no megaphones, just a handmade sign placed gently against a bollard. No more fights, no more fear. Fix the system, not each other. Within minutes, people began taking photos, not to post online for outrage, but to remember. To remind themselves that the story of Bristol is not only the story of confrontation, it is also the story of what happens after the shouting stops. And in that quiet, a truth emerged. Migrant hotels are not the crisis. The crisis is a country that has forgotten how to speak without shouting, how to debate without dehumanizing, how to disagree without detonating. Britain's streets can hold crowds. Its police can hold lines. But a nation can only hold its future if it chooses to. This is Empire Alert News. And the story of Bristol is not finished, because neither is Britain.